Welcome to the podcast of Rogue Valley Christian Church, located in Medford, Oregon. We strive to be a people who gather together to connect the unconnected to Jesus, grow together in full devotion to God, and serve the world with Him.
So we have the privilege of continuing our study in the book of Colossians. And so I'd invite you to grab a Bible in front of you, or if you brought one, and look at Colossians chapter 3. And we're going to be looking at Colossians 3, verses 1 through 4 together. And what we're going to see is that this has a lot to say about a Christian perspective. How Christians can view life, can view their circumstances, can view the world, can view the future. A lot about Christian perspective. And you know, our perspective is really powerful for our life experience. Our perspective is really powerful. I read this article a little while back from the New York Times, and it suggests that the happiest people on earth have the lowest expectations. You got to hear this. A number of years ago, the British Medical Journal published a paper about why Denmark consistently scores highest on measures of life satisfaction in Western countries. This is their conclusion. The country's secret is a culture of low expectations. It's a David and Goliath kind of thing, said the lead author, Kara Christensen, a professor at the University of Southern Denmark. If you're a big guy, you expect to be on the top all the time, and you're disappointed when things go bad. Christensen said, but when you're down at the bottom like us, you hang on, you don't expect much, and once in a while you win, and it's that much better. They also eat fatty foods, drink a lot, genetically are not significantly different from their gloomier Scandinavian neighbors, but on surveys, the Danes continually report lower expectations for the year to come compared with most other nations, and year after year, they are pleasantly surprised to find out that not everything is getting more rotten in the state of Denmark. Yeah, I just thought it's obviously comical to some degree, but it's amazing that sometimes our life satisfaction might have more to do with our perspective than our actual circumstances, and that's amazing. And last week, Darren walked us through some of the issues the Colossians were having with their perspective. And their perspective was to make a lot of rules and have a lot of regulations, because then they could kind of control things, they could control their own spirituality, and they could try to make sure that if they did these rules and regulations right, and they worshipped the right angels, and if they denied their body and didn't have pleasure in life, if they followed all this stuff, then maybe the righteous God would be happy with them, the sinful human beings. And Paul again and again and again in Colossians says, no, you don't need all these activities and rules to mediate between you and God. You need to be connected to God in Jesus Christ. And you can be connected to Jesus Christ. And so he just kind of keeps pounding this in over and over again in the book of Colossians. And today we get to look at how transformed people actually have a transformed perspective. And their perspective is eternally minded, and their perspective is heavenly minded. And so we get to unpack that a little bit today as Paul shares with us in Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. So I'm going to read, you can read with me. Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. And so we're actually going to start by looking at verses 3 and 4, where he said, you died, and your life is now hidden with God. Okay? And then says, it's hidden with Christ in God. So we're going to start there, because what's really important is that Paul is talking about the believer's identity. He's talking about who they are and that they've been transformed. The very first verse in chapter 3, since then you have been raised with Christ. Since then, because this is true, then the following. So he's saying, because you have new life, then the following is true. And so I was wondering, okay, well, what is life? What's he talking about here? It's talking about life. And if you look it up, it has some interesting things to say, but it basically is just like, okay, you can either be dead or you can be alive. Alive is what life is. And I was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. And but I did look at the dictionary for the Bible, and it just said, this is talking about life, real and genuine. Life, active and vigorous. So he's saying, you guys have been given new life, and your life is hidden with God. This is something to be excited about. You once were dead, but now you're alive. Things have changed. You've been transformed. Everything is different now, because before, when you did not have a breath in your body, everything has changed. And, we sometimes talk like that a little bit. We might say, ball is life. Like if you hang out with basketball players, they like those Nike shirts that say, ball is life. And it's just, I live for the gym. I live to get in there and take that shot. I live to get in there and sweat and run around. And ball is life. That is the pinnacle of everything. And we're like, once I just get to my next hunting trip. Or, my grandkids, they are my life. We talk like that all the time. And Paul's saying, that's great, but Christ is your life. He is the center of all. He is what gives you vigor and action and excitement. And last week, Darren mentioned the verse, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. But I, Jesus says, have come that you may have life and life abundantly. And so what Paul's talking about, it's big, it's abundant, it's exciting, it's good. And the believer has that because they have been raised with Christ. Another way to think about it, as I was thinking about this, is Ready Player One. If you saw that movie, Ready Player One, there's this guy, Wade Watts, and he's a high schooler. And basically nothing's really going well in his life, and it's in the future, and so every movie about the future, everything's bad and gloomy and the sky's gray all the time, kind of like right now. And it's just always like that. And so he's really poor, everything's really bad, but the good news is there's the Oasis. And you can plug into the Oasis, this virtual reality gaming platform, and millions and millions and millions of people are in this game. And although your real life is really lame and you don't have any friends and you don't talk to people, then when you go in here, you're somebody else, and it's really exciting, and there's all these places you can explore in this game, this virtual reality. And he's really good at this game, and so he actually ends up beating the whole game. And when you beat the whole game, you become in charge of the game, and you get to make the rules. But, kind of a spoiler alert here, throughout the whole story, he actually has to come back into real life, and he makes all these friends, and he connects with all these people, and he kind of sees that game is a lot of fun, but it's not real life. And now that I've tasted real life, I don't want to just live for that anymore. And so once he's in charge, 2 days a week, he shuts the whole game down. Every week, every month, every year, he shuts it down so people have to get out and get to know each other, because he's tasted real life and he doesn't want to go back. And so we as believers have this real life that we're a part of. And you see the word in there, hidden, in verse 3? It says it's hidden. And it's kind of interesting as we were reading about it that Paul's a pretty clever guy, and he kind of makes fun of the other teachers sometimes. And he's like, they're all about their holy secret books. And they have these holy books, and they have these secrets in them. And the secrets to life are hidden in there. And if you're one of the special few that's enlightened, maybe you can come understand the secrets. And Paul's like, okay, you have the secrets hidden in a book. I have my whole life hidden with God in heaven already. So I kind of one-upped you there. And so Paul is really banking on his life being hidden with Christ, and he's excited about that. But this new life, it's really a transformed identity. Something's been changed about the Christian. Something's different. If you look at chapter 2, verses 11 and through 13, let me read them to you. In him you were also circumcised with a circumcision not performed by human hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised by Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through your faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And so you see two pictures here. He uses the picture of circumcision, But he says it's not something from your flesh that's been removed. It's actually something internal. He's actually done something in your heart to remove your heart of flesh and replace it with a lively, beating heart from God. And he also uses the picture of baptism. And in baptism, you're plunged down, and that signifies that you've died. You've died to an old life, and now you're raised again to new life. And so Paul uses these pictures to say, okay, you guys, you've been transformed. You've been changed. You have a new identity. And so having a transformed perspective, what's key here is having a transformed perspective starts with being a transformed person. It starts with having a transformed identity. And so what is important for a transformed perspective is that we believe we are who God says we are. We have to believe we are who God says we are because we've been transformed. And so you know that Lauren Daigle song, and she says, "You say," and that's kind of a good example of that. Let me read some of the lyrics. She's believing she is who God says she is. She says, "You say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours, and I believe." She's claiming that new identity, and it's actually changing her perspective of herself. And that's kind of the first key to having a transformed perspective, the Christian perspective. And then we see that verse 4 says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, you're going to actually appear with him in glory. And what it's talking about when Christ appears, it's talking about his second coming. It's talking about he's going to return. He's going to return, and it's actually going to be glorious. And because you're united with him, you're going to actually appear in glory too. It's going to be glorious, and we're going to be a part of that gloriousness, this brightness, this greatness. And so what he's actually saying here is, let's have a perspective that's focused on the future. Because when Christ appears again, you're going to appear with him in glory. You may still be stuck in this body, but good things are coming your way. And so he actually looks forward to impact how we think right here and now. He has an eternal mindset. And where this really stuck out to me is in chapter 1, he said Christ is the firstborn of the dead. He's the firstborn of the dead. And so, we don't always talk about firstborn as much in a real technical sense, but I was reading, and scholars will say that being the firstborn back in this time was really important. And it meant multiple things, but one thing it meant is that you have rule and you have authority. You have rule and authority in the family if you're the firstborn. And guess what? Jesus has rule and authority over death. He has rule and authority over death. And so that's just a basic truth of our Christian faith, is the good news that we don't have to be afraid of death. We don't have to worry about the future because we know Christ is reigning over death. He's already defeated death, and he holds the keys to death. And so something we don't have to worry about is death. And Darren and I read this book by a guy named Erwin McManus, and it's called The Last Arrow. And he's a pastor in LA, and in this book he tells his story. And he started writing this book, and then he kind of put it on the side. He's a busy guy doing lots of things, lots of projects. And then at some time when he'd already started this book, he actually got diagnosed with a pretty severe cancer. And then he went back and was like, I'm going to finish this book before I'm taken. I'm going to make sure I finish this book. And here's some of the words from The Last Arrow. Even as I write these words, I am a few hours away from learning the results of a recent biopsy. But I am convinced of this. You must not allow fear to steal your future. And every day that you walk on this earth, you must make sure that you save nothing for the next life. For I am convinced that it is only when we put death behind us that we can genuinely live life to the fullest. And that's one of the most foundational and hope-giving truths, is that we don't have to have a fear of death. We can put that behind us and focus on what's ahead. And in fact, Paul says in Philippians 3, our citizenship is in heaven. We eagerly await a Savior there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies into glorious ones. And so the good news is that we're going to get new bodies. And I know some of us are pretty excited about changing this one out. So, when we have an eternal perspective, like Paul's suggesting here, when we have an eternal perspective, it actually affects how we live right here and right now. We're not just always thinking about that we just forget to act in this life. It just affects how we're going to live here and now. And so, one example of that is from 1 Timothy. I think it's worth reading. Paul says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age." He's focused on this coming age, and he says, the way we live now, we can store up for later. Don't be so focused on the now that you forget about the later. And so Paul comes at that in a lot of his letters, but this one in Colossians that we're looking at today, we really see that having a transformed perspective means we're going to have an eternal perspective. And maybe one easy way to think about it is like Sarah and I, we might be like, okay, we want to go on a big vacation this summer. We want to do something really fun. And so, it's easy to plan, but then sometimes it's a little harder to save. And so we might plan ahead, and we're like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. And then we're like, in the meantime, we're like, hey, it's Friday night, let's go out, let's have some fun, let's go eat something good. And then we're like, oh yeah, we got to save a little money for the future if we are going to enjoy it. So we're like, okay, let's eat at home tonight. So our long-term perspective might change how we live right here today. Let's look at Colossians 3, verses 1 through 2. "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." So we're going to see here that a transformed perspective is going to be a heavenly perspective. It's going to be giving up our values and vision of how things work on earth for values and vision from heaven and how things look from God's perspective. So we notice that, he says, set your hearts on, set your minds on. He says, okay, you guys, take some action here in focusing yourself. And when we were doing our prep for the sermon this week, Lon read out of the ESV, and that actually says, seek the things above. It says, seek those things. And there's another version that says, keep seeking. And I really like that word seek because it actually draws you back to Christ's own words of saying, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And so Paul's saying, okay, you got to seek the things above. Set your mind on these things. This is going to be really great. And he talks about the heart and he talks about the mind. So he's covering the whole person here. Our desires, what we want, our intents, what our values are, and then the way we think and how we're looking at life, our outlook on life, what we're focused on, or we could say kind of our vision. And so he's talking about our values and our vision. Set them, align them with God. And he says, don't set them on earthly things. And so, what are the earthly things? I think the earthly things are just the way of thinking about life that makes sense when you don't have Christ. Okay, so remember before you were a believer, how you thought about things, and then Christ becomes a part of your life, and just things start to shift a little bit. The way you see people, the way you see yourself, what you prioritize, it starts to shift when you become a Christian, because you're not just thinking according to your earthly mind anymore. And so I was thinking about this and thinking about that movie Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail. And the whole movie, it's like we got to get this grail of eternal life. If we can drink from the cup of Jesus' Last Supper, then we can actually have eternal life. And this cup still exists somewhere. And most people don't believe, but of course Indiana Jones and his dad still believe that it's out there. So they go through this crazy adventure to get there, and there's all these obstacles they have to overcome. And they get there, and then their nemesis, Nazi general guy, is also there. And of course, he has the gun, so who do you think's making the decisions? And they get to this chamber. There's all these cups. And the final challenge is that you have to pick the right cup. You have to pick the one Jesus actually used. And so the Nazi general's going to get to eternal life first, right? And so he's like looking at all the cups and he's surveying them. And then there's this one that's just made out of gold and it has all these gems on it. And just, wow, this is beautiful. This is fit for the King of Kings. This is fit for Christ. Because look, what would be more fitting for a king? And then he drinks it, and then his life is instantly sucked away and he turns into dust and dies. And so, be careful of the gold cup. And then there's another logic, there's another perspective, there's another way of seeing that thinks, you know, this Jesus was actually a humble person. And though maybe we know he's raised and seated with Christ now, on earth he was a simple son of a carpenter. And so of course the right choice is this little wood goblet that you'd never notice, and you can drink from that and have eternal life. And so we see that the way things make sense from earth is an earthly perspective, but from God's perspective, things look differently. Things really look differently. So it can be really subtle. So listen to this. Do we seek a promotion because it's a good fit for us, or because we like the title? It's like, oh, that's kind of nice to have those letters in front of my name or something like that. Do we relish the victory of our political party because we really believe this is God's best for people, or because we like seeing the enemy get defeated and our hope is really set in our political victories? Do we live righteously because we love God, or for the merit, and just kind of slightly builds our pride up when we live this way? Do we participate in social justice because we have a compassionate God, or because it's kind of a popular thing to do? It's popular, and so we might think, oh, maybe people will notice all the good I'm doing. And so it can just be subtle to see things from an earthly point of view instead of heavenly point of view. And it's interesting with the Colossians, because their earthly point of view, it really led them to making lots of rules and regulations, because they thought that's how they could control things, and that made sense to them, right? And so they might have been like, okay, when we eat food, we can't enjoy it, because food is purely a utility, and if you enjoy it, then food has control over you. And so they might just make a rule and say, food is only a utility, don't enjoy it. If you're enjoying it, spit it out. And they liked stuff like that. And it's interesting, in God's way of seeing things, is he would say, yes, don't be a glutton, but enjoy the good things of life. And he just sees it from a different point of view. So, how do we set our minds on things above? How do we do that? It's just the directing of our focus. We direct our focus. And I think just this morning getting to sing, I think that's one of the best ways, right? Is singing these worship songs that draw our attention to God, draw our attention to his ways. And they don't just engage our minds, they also engage our hearts and start shaping us. And there's also the Word of God, that we can align our minds with him through the Word. We can be with uplifting company, be with people that help point us to God, instead of just looking at things from an earthly point of view. These are all the kind of things. Showing up at church on Sunday. We have a whole week and we might get tossed to and fro, but we come here on Sunday and it might just kind of anchor us and align our minds with God. And that's really cool. And so this heavenly mindset that he's talking about, it's just having the values of God and having the visions of God and letting that shape the way we see life. And it is really good news that we can actually know God's mind. We don't have to just sit here and wonder, well, what are God's values and what are his vision? Because he gave us his word, his written word, and he gave us Jesus who came to this earth and told us a lot of stuff about God. And if we've seen Jesus, then we've seen the Father, and we know what the Father desires. And Darren and I were laughing this week about the phrase, so don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. You know, do you know anybody that's just so heavenly minded, they're no good to anybody on earth. And the irony here is that Paul's actually saying, no, you got to be so heavenly minded that you're earthly good. When you're so focused on heaven, then that transforms how you live now, and you're of so much earthly good. Because Paul's talking about having a perspective from above. And it's kind of like when maybe you're driving in a new city. Have you ever gone to a city that you're not familiar with, and you're driving around and you go to the downtown and all of a sudden the buildings are tall and you can only see so far ahead of you, and you're like, oh great, I'm lost, I'm confused. And now we have GPS. But I would just drive around with my mom around San Diego, and I had no clue where we were. And eventually she would just pop out and we'd get to where we were going. But there's lots of times where you get lost or confused while you're driving, right? And you don't know where to go. And then you're like, oh, I remember. I have a map. And so you can bust out your map. And now we would just bust out our map on our phone. And all of a sudden, everything makes sense. Okay, C Street connects to Alder Street, and if I take Alder Street down to here, I can get where I'm going, right? So we might be confused and lost in the moment, but all of a sudden we have an aerial view. We have a view from above, and it all kind of makes sense. We have the map, and we can see what's going on. And the truth is that things really look different from above. Things really look different. They kind of can make some sense. They kind of change things. And so what's really cool about Paul's perspective is that it's not just, he doesn't just bust out the map and it's just this list of rules and directions of turn right here, turn left there, when you see this sign, do this. It's not all these rules and regulations, the kind of map Paul lays out. It's more like this. In Philippians 4, he says this: whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. He said these are God's values. Now just live into them. Think about them. Keep them on your mind and live into them. And so Paul, he's less concerned with all the right rules of these Colossian teachers that are kind of leading the people astray. He's less concerned with all their mystical ways and all their systems and regulations, and he's more saying, hey, these are the values of heaven. Align yourself with these things. And I think when we start to look for, well, what are the values of God? What is God's vision for people? What is God's vision for our lives? The perspective we can have. There's some shifts that take place. There's some shifts that take place in our perspective. And I just looked just in the book of Colossians, and I came up with a bunch. Here are some of them. Here's some perspective shifts. Maybe some of us were stuck in despair instead of claiming our future hope now. Instead of claiming our future hope now, we're settling for despair. You know, I read in the paper the other day that they're projecting that in the year 2020, 75,000 Americans are going to die from opioid overdoses. 75,000 Americans in 1 year are going to die. That's their projection for 2020. And that sounds like despair. That doesn't sound like the hope God is offering us right now. Maybe some of us we were left to feel unimportant, insignificant by our families, and now we've just stayed there instead of relishing in the reality of an inheritance with God as part of His family. Because you know, Colossians 1:12 says we have an inheritance. Maybe some of us are repeating the mantra, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, instead of saying, I'm forgiven, I'm forgiven, I'm forgiven, just like it says that we have forgiveness of sins in Colossians 1:14. Maybe some of us are discouraged with the church and the state it's in, and we're just kind of trying to hold it together instead of trusting God, who is the head of the body. I was a part of a church where the pastor made some poor choices and he was asked to step down. And it was a really hard time for our church, and I think a lot of people felt discouraged. But the next Sunday, an elder got up, one of the elders of the church, and he said, "This is Christ's church, and against it the gates of hell will not prevail." It's a verse from the Bible. And he was trusting that this is Christ's church. Instead of him worrying and trying to hold it all together, he was trusting Christ, the head. Maybe some of us are stuck in doubting our own righteousness before God instead of resting in the assurance of the gospel of grace. How many times have we heard about His grace that we can relish in and have assurance in? Maybe some of us are cynical about everything that's just going wrong. Instead of focusing on what God has already and is making right. Because Paul says multiple times, be thankful, be filled with thankfulness about what God is doing. Maybe some of us live like we just can't stop sinning instead of living like the victory's already been won because we're raised with Christ. Maybe some of us get caught up in a program and we're trying to follow this program to keep ourselves protected from spiritual enemies. We're always worried about spiritual attack. Instead of just saying and proclaiming the name of Jesus, who it says in Colossians, He's already disarmed those powers and He's already put them to open shame. That Jesus already has victory over other spiritual forces. And maybe some of us are still giving our allegiance to earthly powers, and we're not letting our allegiance to Christ, who's already seated at the right hand of God, take precedence over our other allegiances. Maybe some of us feel unloved, and we get frustrated with anybody that adds to that feeling that I'm not loved, instead of relishing in what God says when He says, "You are dearly loved," in Colossians 3:12. And maybe some of us get annoyed with our brothers and sisters in our Christian body, and we see all the differences, we see all the disagreements, instead of seeing what it says, that we're members of one body called to peace. So we just see all these perspective changes that can happen because we are transformed people. We have a new identity, transformed heart, and a transformed way of seeing the world. And that's informed by us being focused on the future and knowing about eternity, and that's informed by us setting our minds and hearts on things above, where Christ is. And when that takes place, our perspective is changed, and it shifts from despair to hope. It shifts from hating ourselves to loving ourselves. It shifts from having division to having unity. It shifts us from cynicism to gratitude, and it even shifts us from having a temporary mindset to having an eternal mindset.